The grand chamber of the Valathrin consortium hummed with a silence so profound it was a physical weight. Light from the captured star at the heart of the orbital citadel, Xylos, refracted through the crystalline arches of the ceiling, casting long, somber rainbows across the faces of the assembled delegates. It was a light of ancient peace, of ordered millennia, but today it illuminated only fear. At the center of the chamber, a vast holographic display shimmered, not with charts of prosperous trade routes or cultural exchanges, but with a bleeding wound of raw tactical data. A crimson stain, signifying the inexorable advance of the Cathar Dominion, crept across the star map, its tendrils wrapping around the core worlds of the consortium. At its heart pulsed a symbol of such malevolent power that it defied conventional classification. A jagged, spiraling icon designated only as Iron Vortex Slayer. Grand Executor Thalion, his ancient carapace showing the fine stress fractures of a century spent in service, rested his multi-jointed hands on the cool, resonant surface of the council dais. He could feel the low thrum of the station's life support, a rhythm that had once been a comfort, and was now a fragile heartbeat against an impending storm. The Slayer was not merely a ship. The Cathar had built something that violated the known laws of physics. It did not travel through space so much as it unmade it, carving a tunnel of gravitational chaos that left dying stars and fractured planets in its wake. It was a weapon of pure, nihilistic force, a monument to a culture that saw dominance as the only meaningful expression of existence, and it was coming for them. The outer defense grid has fallen, a voice, synthesized and without inflection, stated from the Xylan delegate's position. The delegate was a being of pure data, its physical form a simple column of swirling light. All fleets stationed at the Cygnus threshold have ceased transmission. Probability analysis indicates a 99.9 recurring percentile of total asset loss. The Slayer did not engage them. It simply passed through them. A low murmur rippled through the assembled beings. There was the chitinous clatter of a nervous Lorian shift, the deep, guttural sigh of a J-Car warrior monk. Thalion's gaze swept over them, seeing not the leaders of a dozen starfaring civilizations, but frightened children huddled in the dark. He had led this consortium through 2 minor border conflicts and the great economic collapse of the 9th cycle, but this was different. This was not a war. It was an extinction event wearing the armor of a warship. Our gravitic torsion cannons had no effect, added Admiral Vorl, his voice a low growl that seemed to shake the very air. He was a Cathar defector, his people's greatest strategist, who had fled their bloodthirsty expansionism a generation ago. His presence was a constant, bitter reminder of the enemy's nature. Its phase-distorted hull simply ignored the impacts. The energy dissipated as if thrown into an empty dimension. We are firing ghosts at a god. Thalion turned his gaze back to the map. One small, solitary icon sat stubbornly in the path of the Cathar advance. It was a simple, unassuming symbol, colored a pale blue that seemed almost offensively placid against the raging crimson. The icon of a single, independent vessel. "And the humans?" Thalion asked, his voice low and weary. The word felt strange in the chamber, a sound from a distant, almost mythological story. The humans were a young species, barely 1,000 of their years out among the stars. They had settled a sparse cluster of worlds on the galactic rim, a quiet and enigmatic presence that had never sought membership in the consortium, nor had they ever shown aggression. They were considered a curiosity, a minor race of ephemeral bipeds with a strangely melancholic art and a perplexing obsession with preserving their own history. They maintain their position, the Xylan delegate reported. Their single vessel, registry name Vanguard, holds its station at the designated diplomatic rendezvous point, directly in the Slayer's projected path. A scoff came from the Lorian delegate, a tall, insectoid being whose crest feathers quivered with disdain. A single ship, a relic, our archives indicate it is one of their first interstellar craft, an antiquity they endlessly refit but never replace. It is a museum piece they fly out of some bizarre sentimentality. What can they possibly hope to achieve with it? Are they offering to bore the Cathar into submission with a historical lecture? The chamber echoed with grim, nervous agreement. The human ship was infamous in its own quiet way. It was not a warship. It was not a dreadnought. It was a long, smooth, featureless cylinder of a dark, non-reflective material with no visible weapon ports, no ostentatious engine signatures, no shield emitters. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace that bordered on lethargic. To the great military powers of the galaxy, it was an absurdity, a testament to humanity's perceived naivete. They had been offered modern military technology, shield generators, even decommissioned Valathran destroyers. They had politely refused every time. They kept their ancient ship. "They have offered to mediate," Thalion said, his voice a flat line against the rising tide of panic. He remembered the communication received only a cycle ago. A calm, measured voice, speaking their own language with flawless, unaccented precision. It had not pleaded or postured. It had simply stated its intention to be present and to offer a path to de-escalation. "Mediate with the Cathar?" Vorl boomed, his massive form rising slightly from his seat. "Grand Executor, you know as well as I do, one does not mediate with a hurricane. You either flee it or you are torn apart by it. The Cathar see diplomacy as a tactic of the weak, a prelude to subjugation. To them, this offer is an insult to their power, a joke that they will answer with annihilation." "Then what is their strategy?" Thalion mused, more to himself than to the council. "They are not a foolish people. Their understanding of theoretical physics is unconventional but profound. Their expansion was slow not because of technological lack, but by deliberate choice. They consolidate, they study, they reflect. There is a depth to them we have not fathomed, a quiet patience that has always unsettled me more than the Cathar's overt aggression." The Xylan delegate's light column pulsed. "Their psychological profile is an anomaly. They exhibit what their own historical texts refer to as melancholy optimism. They are acutely aware of entropy, of loss, of the finite nature of existence, yet they persist in long-term projects of galactic-scale preservation and observation. They catalog dying stars. They build archives on barren moons to house the cultural records of extinct civilizations they never met. Their central philosophy appears to be a form of cosmic stewardship. It is illogical, it is inefficient, it has no discernible strategic value." "Perhaps we have been measuring value with the wrong instruments," Thalion whispered. His gaze was fixed on that single blue icon. It was so small, so utterly alone. He felt a pang of something he hadn't experienced since he was a youngling, a desperate, irrational flicker of hope. It was a foolish feeling, born of the absence of any logical alternative. All their power, all their fleets, all their millennia of accumulated wisdom and technology had amounted to nothing. They were facing the abyss, and the only thing standing before it was a single, ancient ship from a race of poets and historians. The Cathar's final ultimatum had arrived an hour ago. It was not a message of terms, but a declaration of intent. The Iron Vortex Slayer would sterilize the Valathran home system of Thalos as a final testament to Cathar supremacy. The consortium would be dissolved, its member worlds assimilated or purged. The broadcast had ended with a live feed from the Slayer's command bridge, showing the sneering, tusked face of Warlord Craig, his roar of triumph echoing across the silent void. The countdown had begun. "The humans have requested a final communication with this council before they engage," the Xylan delegate announced, its tone unchanging. "They are hailing us now." A profound stillness fell over the chamber. This was it, the final, desperate act of a futile play. Thalion felt the weight of his civilization on his shoulders. He had a duty to his people, a duty to listen, even if it was only to the last words of a brave, foolish species about to be erased from history. He straightened his posture, the crystals of his ceremonial robes chiming softly in the silence. "Open the channel," Thalion commanded. His voice did not waver. Whatever was to come, they would face it with the dignity befitting a civilization that had watched galaxies be born. The central hologram shifted. The blood-red map of Cathar aggression dissolved, replaced by a simple, unadorned viewscreen. On it appeared the face of a human, a female. Her features were symmetrical, her skin pale, her hair a dark cascade that fell over one shoulder. She wore a simple dark blue uniform devoid of rank or insignia, but it was her eyes that held Thalion's attention. They were a deep, clear gray, and they held no fear. There was no panic in them, no bravado, no desperation. There was only a profound, unshakable calm, a stillness that seemed to absorb the frantic energy of the entire council chamber and nullify it. "Grand Executor Thalion," she said, her voice the same one from the message, a clear, resonant alto. It was utterly composed. "I am Ambassador Eva Restover of the human vessel Vanguard. I trust you have received our previous communications." "We have, Ambassador," Thalion replied, his own voice sounding strained and thin by compare. "Son, we do not understand your intentions. Your ship is insufficient for the threat you are facing. We urge you to withdraw. Do not sacrifice yourselves for a cause that is already lost." The human Rostova offered a slight, almost imperceptible inclination of her head. It was not a gesture of agreement or disagreement, but of acknowledgement. We appreciate your concern for our safety, Executor. However, withdrawal is not an option. The actions of the Cathar Dominion and the nature of their primary weapon system constitute a severe violation of cosmological stability. It is not a matter of war. It is a matter of fundamental principle. The Lorian delegate let out a sharp, clicking hiss of incredulity. Principle? The Cathar are about to unmake your ship and your species from existence, and you speak of principle. Ambassador Rostova's gaze did not shift to the Lorian. It remained fixed on Thalion, a sign of respect for his authority that was both subtle and absolute. There are laws that predate any of our civilizations, Executor. Not laws of politics or territory, but the laws that govern reality itself. The Iron Vortex Slayer does not just destroy. It tears at the fabric of spacetime in a way that creates cascading paradoxes and entropic feedback loops. Its continued operation poses a threat not just to your consortium, but to the causal integrity of this entire galactic arm. We are here to correct this imbalance. Vorl, the Cathar defector, leaned forward, his massive form eclipsing the delegates behind him. Correct it? With what? Your ship has no weapons that can scratch the Slayer's hull. We have analyzed it for centuries. It is a freighter, a colony ship, a museum. It is not a warship. For the first time, a flicker of something new appeared in the ambassador's eyes. It wasn't emotion, not in the way the Valathran understood it. It was a depth of knowledge, a sadness that seemed as old as the stars themselves. You are correct, Admiral, she said, her voice softening slightly. The Vanguard is not a warship. War is a crude and imprecise tool. It is a failure of imagination. We do not intend to fight the Iron Vortex Slayer. A wave of confusion washed over the chamber. Thalion felt his mind reeling. What were they saying? What other option was there? Then what do you intend to do? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Ambassador Rostova's calm expression was the last thing they saw before the channel closed. Her final words hung in the profound silence of the chamber, echoing with a meaning they could not yet comprehend. We intend to restore baseline reality. The connection ended, leaving the Grand Executor and his council staring at an empty patch of shimmering air. Outside, in the cold, silent vacuum of space, the ancient, unassuming human ship, the Vanguard, continued its slow, deliberate journey toward the approaching maelstrom. It did not raise shields. It did not charge weapons. It simply flew on, a single dark teardrop against the brilliant, terrifying light of a weapon that had already devoured a dozen stars. The Council could do nothing but watch, their entire civilization, their very existence, now resting on a promise they could not understand, made by a species they had never feared. The fear they felt now was of a different kind. It was no longer the fear of a known enemy, but the terrifying, vertiginous fear of the unknown. The tactical display in the grand chamber reformed, a silent, omniscient eye in the void. The crimson icon of the Iron Vortex Slayer grew larger, its malevolent pulse quickening as it approached the Thalos system. It was a monster of impossible scale, a moving continent of blackened, phase-shifting armor plate and jagged spires that crackled with raw gravitational energy. At its prow, a vortex of captured spacetime churned, a shimmering, non-Euclidean gateway that distorted the starlight behind it. This was the Slayer's primary weapon, a directed singularity capable of erasing a planet from its orbit, leaving not even dust behind. The Consortium's greatest fleets had been swatted aside like insects. The Valathran's own orbital platforms, jewels of engineering that could shatter moons, were now just fragile ornaments awaiting their turn. Then into the frame drifted the pale blue icon of the Vanguard. It looked impossibly small, a mote of dust before a tidal wave. Thalion watched, his ancient heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm against his crystalline ribs. He felt the gaze of every delegate, every being in the chamber, fixed upon that hologram. This was the end of their story, a final, futile gesture of defiance from a species too young to understand the true meaning of hopelessness. He found himself admiring their courage, even as he mourned their foolishness. On the bridge of the Vanguard, the atmosphere was one of serene focus. There were no frantic commands, no blaring alarms. The crew moved with a quiet, practiced efficiency, their faces illumined, aided by the soft glow of their consoles. The main viewscreen was dominated by the terrifying spectacle of the Iron Vortex Slayer. It filled their vision, a testament to physics-defying malice, its gravitational wake causing the very sensors of the Vanguard to fluctuate. Ambassador Eva Rostova stood on the command deck, her hands clasped behind her back, her posture one of absolute stillness. She was not watching the Slayer. She was watching a single, intricate holographic display suspended in the air before her. It showed a complex, multi-layered waveform, a representation of the local spacetime continuum. One part of the wave was violently, hideously distorted, a jagged, cancerous spike of chaotic energy. That was the Slayer. "The weapon is charging," the ship's captain reported, his voice as calm as her own. "Its event horizon is stabilizing. They are targeting the primary moon of Thalos Prime. T-minus 90 seconds to discharge." Rostova nodded, her eyes never leaving the waveform. "The entropic cascade is already beginning. Its existence is poisoning the local laws of causality. It is worse than we projected." "The consortium is watching," the communications officer added. "Their terror is palpable across all channels." "They have lived in a galaxy they believed they understood," Rostova said, her voice a low murmur, a philosophical aside in the face of imminent destruction. "They have mastered travel, energy, construction, but they have never had to confront a force that seeks to unwrite the rules of the universe itself. Their fear is not of destruction, but of meaninglessness. The fear that the cosmos is not merely indifferent, but actively hostile to order." She reached out and with a delicate, precise gesture, touched the holographic display. Her fingers traced a line around the distorted spike of the Slayer's signature. "Is the field stabilized?" "The reality anchor is at 100% coherence," the captain confirmed. "We are ready to impose baseline constants on the target coordinates." Rostova's gaze finally lifted from the display and settled on the monstrous form of the Cathar weapon on the main screen. She saw not just a ship, but an idea, a monument to the belief that might makes reality. It was the ultimate expression of a philosophy that humanity had fought against within itself for millennia before ever reaching for the stars. The idea that one's own will could be imposed upon existence through sheer, brutal force. "The Cathar believe they have built a god," she said softly. "They do not understand. They have only built a blasphemy, and the universe does not tolerate blasphemy for long." She turned to the captain. "Proceed." The captain gave a single, crisp nod. "Engage the anchor, target the anomalous spacetime geometry, reassert Planck-scale constants." A low hum began to emanate from the core of the Vanguard. It was not the powerful thrum of a weapon charging, but a sound more fundamental, like the tuning of a cosmic instrument. The dark, featureless hull of the ship did not glow or pulse with energy. It seemed, if anything, to grow darker, absorbing the ambient light around it. There was no beam, no projectile, no visible discharge of any kind. There was only a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the fabric of space itself, a ripple that spread outward from the human ship, silent and invisible. In the grand chamber of the Valathran, the delegates watched, holding their collective breath. The Iron Vortex Slayer was a vision of Armageddon, its forward vortex glowing with the light of 1,000 tortured suns, ready to unleash its payload of absolute nothingness. The human ship sat before it, motionless, seemingly oblivious. And then it began. It was not an explosion. An explosion would have been comprehensible, a release of energy they could measure and understand. This was something else entirely. The leading edge of the Iron Vortex Slayer, the part of its massive armored prow closest to the Vanguard, began to dissolve. It was not melting or burning. It was simply ceasing to be. The phase-distorted armor, which had shrugged off gravitic cannons like rain, lost its coherence. The impossibly strong alloys unwound into their constituent elements. Then the elements themselves broke down into subatomic particles, and then the particles vanished. There was no radiation flare, no burst of heat or light. There was only a clean, surgical erasure. On the Cathar command bridge, Warlord Craig stared in disbelief as his forward view screen showed a creeping line of non-existence eating its way through his invincible warship. Alarms that had never been designed to sound began to scream, their synthesized wails a chorus of pure technological panic. "What is this?" Craig roared, his tusks bared. "What are they firing?" "Nothing, Warlord," his tactical officer shrieked, his own composure shattering. "There is no energy signature, no projectile, our sensors detect nothing. It's as if the ship is just failing to exist anymore." The line of erasure moved faster. It consumed the forward weapon emplacements, the hangar bays, the primary command spire. Entire sections of the kilometer-long vessel disappeared into absolute nullity, not leaving even vacuum energy behind. The great vortex at its prow, the carefully maintained singularity, flickered. The laws of physics that had been bent and broken to create it were being reasserted. The unnatural construction could not hold. It collapsed in on itself, not with a bang, but with a silent, implosive whimper, the stolen spacetime snapping back into its proper configuration. The wave of unmaking swept through the heart of the ship, through the engine core that was powered by a miniature stolen star. The star did not go supernova. It was simply extinguished. One moment it was a raging furnace of nuclear fusion, the next it was cold, inert matter that then also dissolved into nothing. In the Valathran Grand Chamber, a sound of collective awe and terror filled the air. They were watching a god die. They were watching a mountain vanish. The Iron Vortex Slayer, the symbol of Cathar dominance, the unstoppable force that had broken their fleets and their spirits, was being unwritten from the universe. It was not being destroyed. It was being retracted. It was a cosmic correction, an undoing of a great and terrible mistake. The final section of the Slayer's massive engine block disappeared, and then there was only empty space. The distorted starlight snapped back into place. The gravitational anomalies vanished. The sensor readings returned to normal. Where a moment before there had been the most terrifying weapon ever constructed, there was now nothing, not wreckage, not debris, not even a lingering energy signature. It was as if the Iron Vortex Slayer had never been built. Silence, a profound, absolute silence descended upon the Grand Chamber, upon the remaining Cathar fleet, upon the entire Thalos system. The only thing left in the void was the small, dark, ancient human ship, floating serenely in the exact spot where Armageddon was supposed to have occurred. It had not moved. It had not fired a shot. It had simply been present. The Xylan delegate's column of light pulsed, slowly, weakly, as if its own logic circuits were struggling to process the impossible. Data analysis is inconclusive, it stated, its synthesized voice for the first time containing a trace of what could only be described as bewilderment. All sensor logs from the past hour pertaining to the Cathar vessel are corrupt. No, not corrupt. They are blank, according to our archives, according to all stellar cartography. The Iron Vortex Slayer never existed. Thalion slumped back in his seat, the strength draining from his body. His mind reeled with the implications. It was not just a weapon, it was a statement. The humans had not just defeated their enemy. They had edited reality. They had looked upon the Cathar's greatest creation and with a quiet, unimaginable power had declared, "You are a violation. You are not permitted to exist." And the universe had agreed. A single calm message cut through the stunned silence across all diplomatic channels. It was Ambassador Ristova's voice, as clear and composed as ever. "This is Ambassador Ristova of the human vessel Vanguard. The cosmological imbalance in this sector has been corrected. We are now transmitting surrender protocols to the remainder of the Cathar Dominion fleet. We recommend they comply. We would prefer not to have to perform another correction." There was no triumphalism in her voice, no arrogance, only the quiet, weary finality of a gardener who had just pulled a particularly stubborn weed. The remaining Cathar fleet, a vast armada of cruisers and destroyers that could have subjugated the entire consortium on their own, did not hesitate. Within seconds, their engine signatures powered down, their weapon ports closed, their transmissions flooded the channels with declarations of unconditional surrender. They had just witnessed their god weapon be erased by a power they could not comprehend. Their warrior pride, their entire culture of dominance, had been shattered by a force that did not even recognize their conflict as a war. They were no longer fighting an enemy. They were arguing with the laws of physics, and the humans were the adjudicators. The meeting between Grand Executor Thalion and Ambassador Ristova took place not in the Grand Chamber, but in Thalion's private meditation room, a quiet space where the only light came from the swirling nebulae projected onto the domed ceiling. Thalion had insisted on a direct, personal communication, needing to look into the eyes of the being who had wielded such impossible power. Ristova's image appeared before him, a perfect holographic representation, her calm gray eyes seeming to peer into his very soul. For a long moment, Thalion could not speak. He, the leader of a civilization that measured its age in eons, felt like a child before an ancient, unknowable entity. "Ambassador," he began, his voice raspy with emotion. What is the Vanguard?" "It is what we told you it was, Executor," Ristova replied gently. "It is one of our first interstellar vessels. It is a very, very old ship." Thalion shook his head slowly. "No, an old ship does not unmake reality. What we witnessed was not technology as we understand it. It was something else. The Vanguard is not a weapon. Rostova reiterated, her expression patient, as if explaining a complex concept to a student. It is a tool, a cosmological instrument. Its primary system is what we call a reality anchor. It does not project force. It projects a set of immutable, baseline physical laws. It observes a region of space, compares its structure to the foundational constants of the universe, and if a significant deviation is detected, it reinforces the original state. Thalion struggled to grasp the concept. It enforces the laws of physics. In a sense, Rostova affirmed, the Cathar, through stolen and poorly understood technology, created a localized paradox. They were tearing holes in spacetime to power their weapon and propel their ship. This was not a stable act. It was creating entropic feedback, polluting the causal stream. Left unchecked, it could have eventually led to a regional breakdown of physical law. The Iron Vortex Slayer wasn't just destroyed. It was nullified because its very existence was predicated on a set of physical impossibilities. The anchor simply reminded that sector of space what was and was not possible. The ship, being impossible, ceased to be. The sheer, breathtaking scale of the philosophy behind such a device washed over Thalion. The humans had not built a bigger gun. They had not devised a stronger shield. They had gone back to the very source code of the universe and built a machine to protect its integrity. They were not warriors. They were cosmic librarians, ensuring the books of reality were not vandalized. Why, Thalion asked, the question a raw whisper. Why do you have such a thing? Why would you build it? Rostova's calm demeanor was finally tinged with a deep, ancient sorrow. It was the look of a being who carried an immense burden. Because the Cathar were not the first to attempt this. They are not even the most dangerous. They were just the loudest. We built the Vanguard because long ago we detected a pattern in the cosmos, a signal, or rather the absence of one. She gestured, and the star map of the galaxy appeared around them. It was a familiar sight to Thalion, a swirling vortex of 100 billion stars. But then Rostova adjusted the scale, pulling back and back, until their own galaxy was just one of many, a bright speck in the vast intergalactic void. She pointed to a region of that void, a great, dark emptiness between galactic clusters. We call this region the Great Silence, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. According to all our cosmological models, it should be populated with nascent galaxies with ancient, dim star clusters. There should be background radiation, quantum foam, the faint echoes of creation. But there is nothing, not just an absence of matter and energy, an absence of space-time itself. It is a wound in the universe, a patch of reality that has been erased, and it is growing. Thalion stared at the encroaching void on the map, a creeping dread coiling in his gut that was colder and deeper than anything he had felt when facing the Cathar. What is it? A natural phenomenon. We do not believe so, Rostova said, her gray eyes dark with grim certainty. We have analyzed the edges of the silence. The erasure is not random. It follows a complex, terrifyingly precise mathematical pattern. It is deliberate. It is intelligent. Something or someone is not just destroying galaxies. It is editing them out of existence, removing them from the past, present, and future. We have detected faint, trillion-year-old echoes from the galaxies that once existed there. The last transmissions are not of war or fear. They are of confusion as their own physical laws begin to fail them, as their stars begin to unravel for no reason. They were being corrected, just as the Slayer was. The truth crashed down on Thalion with the force of a supernova. The Vanguard, the reality anchor, it was not a tool built to police upstart empires. It was a defense, a desperate, almost unthinkable defense against a foe that operated on a cosmological scale. The humans had discovered a predator that fed on reality itself, and they had spent their entire existence as a spacefaring race quietly, secretly, preparing for the day it would turn its attention to their corner of the universe. The Iron Vortex Slayer, Thalion breathed, understanding dawning in his eyes. It was a test for you. Its methods were a crude but recognizable echo of the phenom. Enon we are studying, Rostova confirmed. It was a localized, amateur version of what is happening on a cosmic scale in the Great Silence. We could not allow it to continue, both for the danger it posed to your consortium and for the data we needed to gather. We had to know if the anchor would work. We had to know if baseline reality was strong enough to defend itself if only it were properly reinforced. The quiet, unassuming humans, the melancholic poets and historians, Thalion finally understood. Their slowness, their patience, their obsession with preservation and archives, it was not a quirk of their culture. It was a strategy. They were building a library of what was, a testament to existence in the face of an entity that sought to create a universe of what was not. Their melancholy was not despair. It was the profound sobriety of those who understood the true stakes. Thalion looked at the human ambassador, at her calm, sad, resolute face, and for the first time he felt the true measure of humanity. They were not a young race. They were the galaxy's first and only line of defense against an enemy so vast it defied imagination. They were not fighting for territory or for glory. They were fighting for the right of the universe to exist at all. "You have carried this burden alone," Thalion said, his voice thick with a new emotion, a profound, humbling respect. "We are not a species that believes in forcing our burdens upon others," Rostova replied. "We had to face this threat ourselves to understand it before we could ask for help. But now the silence is accelerating. The pattern is becoming clearer. It is moving in this direction. The time for solitude is over." Thalion stood, his ancient form drawing itself up to its full height. The fear he felt was immense, an existential dread that dwarfed any fear of war. But it was no longer the paralytic fear of the helpless. It was the sharp, clarifying fear of the soldier who has finally seen his true enemy. He looked at the vast, star-dusted hologram surrounding them, at the tiny, precious island of their galaxy, and then at the encroaching, absolute nothingness beyond. He was the grand executor of the Valathran Consortium, a leader of civilizations, a guardian of peace. His purpose, he realized, had just become infinitely larger. "Ambassador Rostova," he said, and his voice was no longer the voice of a weary politician, but of an ally, a partner in a struggle beyond all comprehension. "You are not alone anymore.